Hi, and welcome to the LinkedIn Live special edition on the release of the ISM Supply Chain Planning Forecast. My name is Dan Zeiger. I'm senior writer and copy editor for Inside Supply Management, which is Institute for Supply Management's member publication. And we're excited to have you with us today and hope your holiday season's off to a great start. The forecast is based on responses from the Manufacturing and Services Business Survey panelists that help compile the monthly ISM PMI reports. It reports recent sector performance provided by the purchasing and supply executives. Those are the people on the front lines of the U.S. economy, and more importantly, their sentiments for the coming year. Manufacturing and services executives expect growth in production capacity, employment, capital investment, and revenues in 2026. Now, none of those figures are gangbusters, and CapEx growth, for example, is projected to slow compared to 2025. But prices growth is expected to slow too, and probably there are some executives doing the Snoopy holiday happy dance over that, hoping it holds. But there's a lot to talk about. I have my questions, and I took copious notes from the media call they did less than an hour ago. So we'll get a lot of great insights today from Susan Spence. She's the chair of the ISM Manufacturing Business Survey Committee, and Steve Miller. He's the chair of the Services Business Survey Committee. Friends, I got to admit, I was surprised by some of the results given the PMI readings of late, but it looks like there's a lot of cautious optimism out there. And Steve, I'll start with you. Just what stood out to you on the services side?
I think cautious optimism continues to be a good catchphrase. We've seen some improvement in the monthly services PMI from May till now, kind of a trend up. But as I mentioned before, 2025 is the lowest 12-month reading that we've seen for quite some time. So the 4.6% projected revenue growth for 2026 compared to the 4.2% actual for 2025 sounds like a very reasonable, cautiously optimistic viewpoint as of now.
And yeah, Susan, what stood out to you on the manufacturing side?
That there was any optimism at all stood out to me. My context is, I came into this chair position in May, right when we were in the thick of it. So I don't have the long context yet. But as I said in the press conference short time ago, I think our panelists are rightly so sitting back and not forgetting what's gone on this year, but trying to take a longer view. And as Steve said, it's cautious optimism, and it is not gangbusters, but that there was any was always good. These panelists need to see this manifest, of course, in new orders that don't just pop up for 1 month.
Yeah. Let's camp there a little bit. I mentioned at the top, I was somewhat surprised. And was it a little bit out of line from what you expected, Sue, given, the PMI results, especially on the manufacturing side? We also had an federal employment report today that dropped that wasn't all that great. And I'll just say that, if you've been paying attention to the ISM PMI reports in recent months, that figures in there weren't much of a surprise to you. But yeah, just given what has been happening on the manufacturing sector in the recent side, in recent months, talk about a little bit more about what the results showed and how they might have been a little unexpected.
Yeah, sure thing. Let us start with the comment you made about employment. So employment is predicted to go up only 0.4, flat, pretty much. Makes sense given what we've seen all year. And I got to believe the panelists have insight into what's going to happen at their companies, which is even though they expect to spend a bit more on capital expenditures, 3% more, production rate increases up to 5.2 in 2026. It looks like they're planning to do it with a level of employment not different than what they have today, which tells me that they still have cautiousness around what's going to happen with tariffs. So I would predict that if there is a tariff ruling that sticks, that is in the favor of business, not just a country, but in the favor of business, then and if order book comes back, then there's cause for being a little more optimistic about employment. So it appears to me that these smallish increases are going to be what they need to do to, keep business going. But until they see a big uptick, they're going to hold on employment. It would be my opinion.
Yeah. Well, Steve, from the data and also from the sentiment that you expressed in the media call earlier, the rays of sunshine on the services side are a little bit more bright and strong. I think that's a fair assessment. And you had mentioned, I had a question here. There were largely positive expectations a year ago for 2025, but the May forecast showed us how quickly sentiment can turn. But you also pointed out in the media call earlier that given what we saw in the May forecast and the projections there, the projections for 2026, especially on the services side, have to be a lot more encouraging.
Yeah, the projections from May were significantly more negative than what we're seeing as results for 2025. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, I'll give a little bit more confidence into the December 2025 mm-hmm. projection. It's tough to say. There's less uncertainty now. There's less commentary about the uncertainty. So it seems like people have had time to work through contingency plans and make some changes that they feel more secure in what they're going to be doing going forward. But certainly in the May timeframe, I think 2/3 of the comments included something around tariffs, and now it's down to about 20%. So that was a huge factor in the May timeframe into what exactly was going to happen. Between May and now, it went from 200% to 20%, I believe, for China. And who knows what it'll be beginning of next year, or if the Supreme Court says, wrong answer, try again. There's still some uncertainty, but I think people, we're always accountable for making things work, keeping supply secure. And when those kinds of kind of back and forth gyrations happen, there's a lot of discomfort because we don't feel like we can keep that cost base and that supply secure for our business. Now, I think we feel by and large more confident, regardless of what happens, that we've thought through contingencies and a way to go. And I think that's being reflected in a 2.5% projection for employment increase in the services sector after, a 0.1% increase in 2025. So I expect that monthly PMI to go up as well, because employment was the only one that was under the 12-month average of the 4 sub-indexes for the composite PMI.
Yeah. Hey, Susan, Steve mentioned the Supreme Court, and I know that was a big theme it's been a big theme in your monthly PMI reports and the media call that we did, that you did earlier. I mean, you're trying to emphasize the cautious optimism and, how it was kind of a surprise to see it because primarily you've got these oodles of tariff comments that are, dominating the discussion on the manufacturing sector every month. Yeah, just talk about that dynamic and, how that might be fueling, if we get some resolution on that, how that might be fueling some of that optimism on the manufacturing side.
Yeah. The other thing I've been thinking about is that, we've been talking since May about frozen decision making, but I guess at some point you have to decide something, mm-hmm. right? So perhaps just like customers that are, waiting in customer inventory too low, customers are waiting to order and only letting out orders that they have to, waiting for things to happen. Perhaps these companies are, in conversations around the executive suite about, we can't do this forever. We can't be on hold forever. We got to decide what we're going to do. And I thought it was really interesting, the percent of manufacturing customers saying we're just going to pass on the tariffs. We have to, either all of it or part of it. The percent of manufacturing companies saying that they are not going to domestically reshore. They're either going to find another country that's not as impacted by tariffs or just leave things the way they are. And the Supreme Court's going to rule how they're going to rule, and then there'll be another effort for getting tariffs a different way, is what we're hearing. So the new reality maybe is, we're just going to pass it along, right? Certainly you can't take too much of a hit on your profit margin, else you won't have a business there. So, we will see. Have we come through the worst of it? Well, things have been threatened, things have been put in place and taken back. Deals have been made, deals have been undone, and now it's at the ceiling of, the highest court in the land is going to say what can be done and what can't. So it's soon to be over, even if it's months more before a decision, and businesses have to operate. So perhaps the small capital expenditure increase of 3% is, perhaps maintenance, things that just they can't put off replacing anymore versus big expansion, right?
Yeah.
And those capital expenditures, by the way, could be in different countries. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the U.S. So, that's a distinct possibility is we're just going to, find a different country to do it in, and, won't be the U.S. for a lot of these folks.
Well, that's a perfect transition, because capital expenditures was the, one of the numbers as we get into the specific numbers in the report that stood out to me most. As we all know, that's typically a good barometer of company confidence. And I noted in the lead that the projected increases in capital expenditures in 2026 were lower year over year. I guess that's accurate. But if you look at what was anticipated in May, I guess you could say that's also a good sign. So I'll let you guys speak for that. What did those results say to you? Were they maybe a little higher or lower than you expected, given, the interest rate cuts that we've seen from the Federal Reserve? Steve, I'll just start with you on that.
I thought with all of the talk with AI and how heavily it would impact services sector areas, that we would see higher numbers than we saw over last year. The thing that I had some confidence in is the percentage of companies that said they will hire or put in place specific AI roles related to that. But really what I was expecting to see was very high numbers on the AI questions that we had in the special questions, together with increased capital investment over last year. And what I think made an exclamation point on that for me, Dan, was looking at the capacity utilization being up year over year, and investment in capital improvements going down year over year in terms of the level. So I think it's 2.3% versus, or 2.2% versus 2.4%, something like that. That for me was a real surprise.
Yeah. Let me give you the specific numbers. Capital expenditures in manufacturing are projected to increase 3.5% expected to increase 3% in 2026 after a 3.5% increase in 2025. On the services side, they're projecting a 2.5% increase after a 3.9% increase in 2025.
Right, there you go. Okay. Yeah, even bigger drop year over year.
Yeah. So, Sue, what did you see on manufacturing side there?
I'll echo what Steve is saying. If I don't know if the question was really more about AI or capital expenditures, but what type of capital expenditures are these companies planning would be my question. I love the special questions. They're fascinating to me. The percent of manufacturing not using AI at all or just piloting is, really, it's like 61%, 32 and 29. So it's infancy in manufacturing. There's a long way to go. Perhaps it would be different if there wasn't such uncertainty, not to keep beating a tired drum here, but, an AI application can be, just a great thing for a company to do for efficiency. But if they're not expanding because they're not sure what the policies of the country are going to be economically, and therefore how it's going to impact their price, again, maybe we would be further along with AI applications, at least piloting or starting to make plans if there was a general expansion going on, right? If unemployment was at a very low rate and capacity was closer to 100, then, how do we increase capacity without having to replicate factories and, footprint? And maybe there'd be more, it's speculation on my part, maybe there'd be more of an AI push on the manufacturing side. But right now, the whole frozenness of decision-making on capital and hiring, it's, maybe even impacting this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. The special questions at the end are always one of the most interesting parts of the supply chain planning forecast. And I hope we get to talk more about that before we wrap up time here, because yeah, there were some very interesting topics on AI, as both of you mentioned, and on tariffs and passing them along and reshoring. So yeah, I hope I'll try to move this along here, and we'll get to that at the end. The operating rates were also those numbers stood out to me. Definitely up, over May. And Steve, I thought you had a good point in the media call. That could be a kind of a double-edged sword, because in the second half of the year, there's less capacity, to catch up and for the services sector to grow, because the operating rate is already so strong. So I'll be interested to see you elucidate on that a little bit, but I'll start with Sue. Just talk about the operating rate in manufacturing, and was that an encouraging thing to see?
If you look back to what was predicted a year ago, and then there was, of course, May drop off a cliff. Mm-hmm. We're only back to what they predicted a year ago, right? Mm-hmm. So in December 24, on average 82.3, right? Mm-hmm. We finished at 82.4. So it's unremarkable to me. It makes sense in some ways that the year started the way they thought, although in December nobody knew what was going to happen in tariffs. So that it recovered at all to 82.4 is a bit of a surprise. Mm-hmm. And again, we'll see. We're seeing our panelists predict for manufacturing a 5.2% average increase for 2026. Okay. I'm not sure how that compares with year ends in the past, but that might be also unremarkable and fairly normal. It's not a big, huge increase, in my opinion.
Yeah. Steve?
Yeah. So the comment that I had was, if we're already at 90+% capacity utilization, and someone decides, say, services providers, this demand that we weren't expecting, now it's here, we need you to step up and start producing. They've already gone through 6 months of very slow or no employment growth. And so seeing that capacity, given that people are such an important component of capacity in the services industry, it's not a surprise to see us go from 87 to 90. But then on the very competitive areas of the business, the technical services, utilities, they're already talking about difficulty in hiring talent, the right talent, and the right skill levels. So we may think we're going to hire at 2.5% and generate nice revenue growth year over year. That comes with the expectation that we're actually going to be able to get the people that we need when the demand comes in. And when you're already operating at 90%, there's only so much you can do by saying work harder and work longer, which could put a real strain on supply chains. And we saw on the semiconductor side when people said, "Oh, just kidding, we really do need those semiconductors," a couple of years ago. And they said, "Well, okay, in a couple of years, you'll get them." Yeah. Same thing could be happening on the services side next year if demand really heats up with lower taxes in some areas, with increased consumer spending, which seems to be projected now, and a very low expectation of recession in 2026.
Yeah. Well, one of the elements that's always going to be paid attention to, not only in the forecast, but in the monthly PMI reports in this environment, is prices. And I had mentioned that the growth was expected to slow in the top. I got to correct myself a little bit. I misspoke a little bit. That's true in manufacturing. Prices paid increased 5.4% in 2025, and they're only expected to increase 4.4% in 2026. In services, there's a little bit of increased growth. The prices paid increased 3.6% in 2025 and are expected to increase 4.2% in 2026. So a mixed bag there. Steve, I'll start with you. Regardless, was that an encouraging number or a number that you were expecting, given the current environment regarding the prices paid?
Yeah, with the prices paid number on the monthly report starting to ease a bit, but still in the 60s, that number is not a huge surprise, but it was a surprise. The other side of it, just to go back to what we were just talking about, when capacity is tight, people can afford to charge more, and so you get prices paid to start coming in higher, and then there's some stickiness there. To me, it's a modest flow through of tariff impacts, probably a contributor there. And then when you look back at what was expected in May versus what really happened, significantly better than what we were expecting in May. So I think that's a good sign, but it was a little surprising that we were over 4% there.
Yeah. And Sue?
I think my gut told me that it should have been higher given all the strife we've heard. So I guess the conclusion is maybe folks are just thinking tariffs are going to get undone with the Supreme Court ruling, or we've already paid so much more that, we're past the worst and maybe it's going to be modest, 5.4 in 2025 and another 4.4 expected. So the number I think is smaller than I would have guessed, but we will see what happens in the end. There's such a direct impact in some of these industries to these huge numbers that get thrown around.
Yeah. And then one more index reading or survey reading was obviously going to be paid a lot of attention to is employment. Sue had alluded to it in her introduction that the 0.4 projected increase is flat. And Steve had pointed out, I believe the number, if my memory serves, is 2.6 as they project. A little bit more sunny there in services. What does that signal in terms of maybe demand? And you both have spoken about the special question on AI and how that could relate to business planning and maybe employment numbers. Just an all encapsulating question there on employment there. And I'll start with Sue on this.
Hey, I think given the lack of adoption of AI on manufacturing, 32% not doing anything, 29 just piloting. I don't think that we can attribute any increase, or any lack of increase to, robots going to take my job, right? Perhaps it'll be different in a few years. It just doesn't seem to be having a big impact yet. I think the anemic increase of 0.4 is more about, we're going to hold on employment until we see what these economic policies shake out to be, the hit on our profit margin, if we have to absorb any of it, and therefore, and what will customer behavior look like regarding new orders and backlog.
Yeah. Steve?
Yeah. So Dan, we went from 0.1% increase in reported for 2025 to 2.5% predicted for 2026. And that change comes from fewer saying they're going to have lower employment and more saying they're going to have higher employment, and the same percentage saying they'll be the same. So that good sign from less contraction from other industries. So I think that's positive. I'm looking at some data here. Professional, scientific, and technical services and information were two of the top three in terms of showing that there increases in employment. Makes a lot of sense in an AI world that we'll be seeing increases in those two categories. Those two industries, utilities and wholesale trade are also some of the top performers, which again you'd expect to see in growth in processing and compute capability, where we see a significant constraint in utilities at the time, and increasing costs for utilities, particularly in Virginia and some other areas. So a positive sign on employment. The positives are not getting more positive, meaning they're not saying, hey, we're going to be hiring more. Just there are more industries, more respondents that are saying we expect positive growth, which is a good sign for the economy.
Yeah. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, and yeah, I'm happy to say we will get to the special question topics because, yeah, like I said earlier, I thought a couple of them, well, they always are very interesting. Steve and Sue have talked about the AI special question. There were questions on tariffs and the reshoring one. That's been going on for a few years now. Those numbers where companies say they're not looking into changing supply chain partners are a lot higher than I would expect, or maybe you would, considering all the chatter that you hear about reshoring in recent years. And I had mentioned on our PMI calls in last month that Inside Supply Management wrote about that recently. They called reshoring a mixed bag. So that result was kind of a surprise to me. And, we also had another question about, the timing of tariffs and passing along and what they plan on that. But I'll just, ask what stood out to you guys, in terms of the special questions. And I'll start with Steve on that.
On the supply chain changes side, there were two things together that stuck out to me. 46% of respondents said they'll not raise prices due to tariffs, either that they're not seeing impacts from tariffs or they're going to absorb tariffs in their profit margins. And then 68% said they won't be looking into changing supply chain partners. So for me, it either they've ingested that and adjusted as necessary, or it's just not that big of a deal in their minds going forward, which either way was a surprise to me. The second one is the One Big Beautiful Bill had 71% of service industry respondents saying that they're not going to be taking advantage of the ability to accelerate depreciation or the accelerated depreciation benefits in 2026. That's not what I'm hearing from people in my area. So, you could get your expectations skewed by the people that you happen to be listening to at the time. But seeing from the survey, which is a huge, much broader perspective on the services industry, having 71% saying they're not, seems like a missed opportunity. But it was a much higher number than I expected.
Yeah. Sue?
Yeah, I'll start where Steve left off, the no effect from the full expensing provision in the OBBBA, 59%. So if you're not spending money on capital, right? What do they say? 10% of nothing is still nothing. Right. So it's not been enough to move. Just like the tariffs have not been enough to cause manufacturing to want to come back to the U.S. Right. A number of our sector comments in the last few months have been, even with these awful huge numbers in tariffs, it's not enough to bring it back. We're just going to take more of a hit on our profit margins. So the policies are not having the intended effect, unfortunately, and the panelists have been clear about that. The reshoring question is also very interesting to me. Only 33% of manufacturing panelists said that they're not looking to change a supply chain, but another 31% said they're not reshoring. So if you add the two and say 64% of the panelists are saying we're not changing, meaning if you're already out of the country, you're staying there, or we're just going to pick another country that seems to be less impacted. So the hopes of the economic policy is not seeming to come through for manufacturing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this has been great. We're coming up to the bottom of the hour, and I definitely want to give both of you a chance to, if there was anything that I haven't asked or that we haven't talked about to this point that stood out to you in the report that you think might be important to include at the end. And sometimes I ask you, if I'm a CEO or an executive, what should I take away? So opportunity for you to comment on that as well. But before we wrap up here, so just some final thoughts. I'll start with you, Steve.
Real change management happens when you have the capabilities inside your company. It's encouraging to see that over 50% of the companies in the services industry said they were deploying or plan to deploy AI, and over 50% said that they'll now deploy new AI-related roles. So I think that's a positive sign to at least see if there's any there.
Mm-hmm. And Sue?
Yeah, just sticking with Steve's theme there, even though the majority of our panelists are not using applications, the fact that almost 30% are piloting something I think that the AI roles will follow, assuming a successful pilot. So while it hasn't really hit the manufacturing footprint in a big way, there's no ignoring it either. So hopefully it's going to be an efficiency play and a way to accelerate, the technology and the human being to go to a higher level thinking job versus replace. But again, you need orders and you need customers to be able to do that. So hopefully that will get a little more accelerated and decisions can be made in the new year with more certainty. Fingers crossed.
Mm-hmm. Well, hey, Steve and Sue, thanks to both of you for joining us today. I always enjoy talking to you one-on-one for the monthly PMI reports, but, it's always fun to have the whole band together. So I'll look forward to the May supply chain planning forecast when we can all get together and talk about that. And thanks to you for joining us today. If you'd like to be one of the ISM Manufacturing or Services Business Survey panelists that help compile data for the ISM PMI reports and the supply chain planning forecast, you can visit ismworld.org/join the panel for more information. It takes just a few minutes to respond each month. And join us for another LinkedIn Live session on January 5th when Susan and I will break down the December manufacturing PMI numbers, and on the 7th when Steve and I will do the same with the services PMI data. So for Sue, Steve, and some good folks who helped us behind the scenes today, their names are Christina Cahill and Jennifer Stevens. My name is Dan Zeiger. Hey, have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you on the other side in 2026. Take care.